In the sweltering heat of late July 2025, as the world watched the geopolitical chessboard with bated breath, a remarkable drama unfolded across the North American continent. It was a tale of defiance, strategy, and the unyielding pursuit of national dignity, pitting a resurgent Canada against the unpredictable might of the United States. At the center of this high-stakes confrontation stood Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, a figure whose career had spanned the pinnacles of global finance before he stepped into the political arena. With the precision of a seasoned economist and the resolve of a leader forged in crisis, Carney delivered a message that echoed far beyond Ottawa's corridors. Canada would reject any attempt to undermine its sovereignty, no matter the cost. This wasn't mere rhetoric. It was a calculated stand against a looming 35% tariff from Washington, targeted at Canadian steel, auto parts, and softwood lumber. Exports valued at over $35 billion annually. As the deadline of July 31st loomed like a storm cloud over the border, something extraordinary happened. Canada didn't flinch. Instead, it drew a firm line in the snow, declaring that it didn't flinch. Instead, it drew a firm line in the snow, declaring that no deal was better than a bad one. This reversal of roles. The United States, once the steadfast champion of free trade and international alliances, now wielding tariffs like a blunt instrument, while polite, pragmatic Canada refused to yield, spoke volumes about shifting power dynamics. It wasn't just a trade dispute. It was a profound test of pride and independence, and the very illusion of dominance that had long defined U.S.-Canada relations. Picture the scene. On July 22nd, 2025, the quaint lakeside town of Huntsville in Ontario, typically a haven for vacationers seeking respite in cottage country, transformed into a fortress of political deliberation. Gone with the leisurely boat rides and flickering campfire lights. In their place, a closed-door summit that resembled a wartime bunker. Provincial premiers gathered, their discussions shrouded in secrecy, as they grappled with the gravity of the moment. Across the border, the Trump administration pressed forward with its aggressive agenda, threatening to impose sweeping tariffs on nearly all Canadian goods, steel, softwood lumber, auto parts. These weren't abstract commodities. They represented the lifeblood of Canada's economy, with billions in annual exports teetering on the edge. This was the kind of disruption that former President Trump had always relished. A bold stroke designed to rally his base and reshape global trade in America's image. But under Carney's leadership, Canada looked at the ticking clock, weighed the resounding assertions. It responded with a resounding assertion. No deal is better than a bad deal. Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England who had navigated the treacherous waters of the global financial crisis, brought a unique blend of gravitas and pragmatism to his role as Prime Minister. He wasn't one for empty bluster. His words carried the weight of experience. Standing before his fellow leaders in the nation, he reiterated a principle that had become his mantra. Canada would not accept a subpar agreement, even if it meant enduring billions in economic pain. This stance wasn't born of recklessness, but of a deep understanding that dignity in negotiations often trumps desperation. The provincial premiers, figures like Ontario's Doug Ford, Alberta's Danielle Smith, and Quebec's François Legault, weren't exactly hoisting celebratory banners, but they offered cautious support. After all, the stakes were immense. 2.3 million Canadian jobs hung in the balance, tethered to industries such as steel, autos, and lumber. This wasn't merely a spat over tariffs, such steel, autos, and lumber. It was a fundamental challenge to Canada's sovereignty. By choosing to brace for potential impact rather than surrender future autonomy for fleeting market access, Canada was signaling a profound shift. The nation had decided that preserving its independence was worth the gamble, even against the world's largest economy. To grasp the essence of Carney's rejection, consider the analogy of a boxing match where the rules are rewritten mid-fight. On one side, Trump enters the ring armed with brass knuckles, improvising regulations and reveling in theatrical flair. His 35% tariff threat is a wild, reckless swing, extending beyond steel and lumber to encompass auto parts, fertilizers, and even energy products. The demands are clear. Canada must align its votes in international forums, relocate production lines southward, or essentially submit to U.S. whims. This isn't fair trade. It's a form of corporate extortion, where economic leverage is weaponized to extract concessions. Carney, stepping into the opposite corner, embodies discipline, strategy, and cold calculation. Drawing from his tenure at the Bank of England, where he steered economies through turmoil, he saw through the bluster. During that pivotal week in Huntsville, he reminded Canadians time and again, "Our objective is not to reach a deal whatever it costs." This philosophy stemmed from a keen awareness of the perils at hand. According to projections from Yale's Budget Lab, these tariffs could shrink Canada's long-term economy by a staggering 2.1%, the most severe impact among studied nations, even before accounting for retaliatory measures or ripple effects through supply chains. But Carney didn't dwell solely on macroeconomic abstractions. He personalized the threat, addressing premiers like Ford and Smith directly. "Your provinces depend on this, and so do our families." The human element was undeniable. Those 2.3 million jobs weren't statistics. They were livelihoods in steel mills, auto assembly lines, and logging operations. Carney's approach transformed what could have been bravado into a masterful game of chess. He wagered that the U.S. couldn't throttle Canada without inflicting self-harm, given the intertwined nature of North American supply chains. The premiers, recognizing this, backed him quietly, preferring the risk of retaliation over ceding sovereignty for unreliable market privileges. Trump's volatility had morphed the negotiation into a spectacle of performance art. But Carney refused to participate as a mere spectator. He emphasized legitimacy over arbitrary timelines, turning the U.S. deadline into a tool of his own. In essence, when Washington attempted to intimidate with tariffs, Canada repurposed that fear into a strategic blueprint, responding with a polite but firm "thanks, but no thanks." From the secretive confines of the Huntsville summit to the bustling boardrooms of Ottawa, Carney orchestrated a daring pivot that went beyond mere resistance. Canada wasn't content to dodge incoming blows. It was constructing a resilient, self-sufficient economy free from over-reliance on its southern neighbor. At the heart of this transformation was Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act, which received royal assent on June 26, 2025. This wasn't a routine piece of legislation. It was a comprehensive overhaul designed to dismantle internal barriers and propel the nation forward. By merging elements of free trade and labor mobility with the Building Canada Act, the bill aimed to eliminate interprovincial trade hurdles and expedite massive infrastructure initiatives, including pipelines, railways, ports, and mines. Carney had campaigned on these promises, and now he was delivering them with unyielding determination. Under the new framework, provincial standards were auto-recognized, national interest projects were fast-tracked to completion in half the usual time, and a dedicated federal office was established to oversee major developments. The premiers played a crucial role in this evolution, signing memoranda of understanding to collaborate on pipelines forged from Ontario steel, rail networks for transporting critical minerals, and expanded coastal ports. The goal was clear: forge domestic supply chains that reduced dependency on U.S. markets, eliminating the need to seek permission from Washington for every economic move. This shift carried a delicious irony. Trump's tariffs, intended to isolate and weaken Canada, instead ignited a wave of national unity and innovation. Suddenly, over 80 countries were reaching out to Ottawa, expressing keen interest in new trade partnerships. Carney's administration projected that resolving the U.S. trade crisis, coupled with the dismantling of internal barriers, could generate up to $200 billion in GDP growth. This wasn't mere economics. It was strategic theater at its finest. While the U.S. indulged in emotional outbursts over steel mills and manufacturing, Canada was quietly fortifying its resilience. The underlying message resonated powerfully. Canada wouldn't flinch because it had opted out of the game altogether, choosing instead to redefine the rules on its own terms. Of course, this bold reinvention wasn't without its critics. Some First Nations groups argued that Bill C-5 marginalized Indigenous consultations, potentially sidelining vital voices in the rush toward progress. Lawsuits loomed on the horizon, highlighting tensions between economic urgency and cultural respect. Carney's response was characteristically forthright. The future demanded swift, unified action, unapologetic in its pursuit of national strength. Canada wasn't cowering in the face of external threats. It was building a self-reliant foundation, brick by legislative brick, pipeline by steel rod, and infrastructure by public mandate. This internal rebirth raised an intriguing question. Who would be calling Canada next? The answer came swiftly and from unexpected quarters, with Washington's tariff tantrum serving as an inadvertent global advertisement. Nations from around the world lined up to respond. Nations from around the world lined up to engage. In post-Huntsville media appearances, Carney didn't mince words. His phone was ringing off the hook with formal overtures from countries eager to ink new agreements. This diplomatic windfall positioned Canada as a beacon of stability in an era of uncertainty, contrasting sharply with Trump's isolationist posturing. As reported by outlets like the Wall Street Journal, Carney was masterminding a strategic coupling. Not a flashy headline-grabbing rupture, but a deliberate, long-term reorientation away from U.S. dominance. His vision extended Canada's economic ties to Europe, Asia, and even Africa, bolstered by Bill C-5's barrier removals. Since its enactment in late June, Canada had ramped up domestic production, constructing pipelines with homegrown steel, shipping minerals via national rails, and enhancing ports to handle increased global traffic. First Nations leaders, however, continued to voice discontent, staging walkouts from consultations on the Building Canada Act and decrying it as hasty and devoid of meaningful dialogue. Carney countered by prioritizing action over procrastination, asserting that the economy's demands for speed outweighed the luxury of endless deliberation. This stance underscored the ultimate irony. What Trump perceived as a punitive weapon had morphed into Canada's golden opportunity. A recent Business Insider analysis posited that these threats could prove an economic blessing in disguise, fostering domestic trade and international diversification, while diminishing U.S. leverage. At the June G7 summit, Carney's subtle orchestration came into sharper focus. Amid growing global disillusionment with America First policies, Canada emerged as a quiet leader, advocating for alliances built on mutual respect rather than coercion. This wasn't just defense. It was a reimagining of autonomy in a multipolar world. The message was unequivocal. Attempts to bully Canada into submission would only accelerate its bridge-building efforts, while others hurled tantrums. As we trace this journey, from drawing defiant lines in the snow to fielding calls from the international community, the narrative builds toward a climactic. Finale. What lies ahead is a triple-act drama, where outcomes pivot on Carney's composure and Washington's adherence to its script. In the first scenario, no deal materializes and full tariffs descend on August 1st. The U.S. unleashes its 35% levy on Canadian exports across the board: steel, autos, lumber, and beyond. Canada, true to form, retaliates in kind, putting those 2.3 million jobs at immediate risk, particularly in the $14 billion steel sector, $23 billion auto industry, and $6 billion timber trade. Yet, this brinkmanship accelerates Canada's internal reforms under Bill C-5, turning chants of unity into tangible policy. Trump may fire the initial shot, but Canada could counter in ways that disrupt American supply chains, revealing the mutual vulnerabilities at play. The second scenario envisions a temporary truce, where mounting pressure from G7 allies compels Trump to soften his stance. Talks extend indefinitely, with Canada holding steadfast amid lingering uncertainties that stifle investment and erode confidence. Yale's Budget Lab estimates that such tariffs could shave 0.7 to 0.8 percentage points off U.S. GDP growth, costing 540,000 to 600,000 American jobs. In response, Canada doubles down on diversification, courting Russian energy alternatives, European machinery, and Asian markets, each new link eroding U.S. influence further. The third possibility, a signed deal before the deadline, offers short-term relief as tariffs are averted, but at a potentially steep price. Canada might relinquish global leverage, straining alliances beyond North America and compromising long-term strategy for immediate gains. Through all these paths, Carney's overarching message rings with poignant irony. Canada doesn't chase deadlines. It pursues dignity. The nation's objective transcends mere agreements. It's about refusing to sacrifice economic sovereignty for access. When trade devolves into weaponry, the boldest move is to stand unbowed. Canada's trajectory isn't merely about weathering tariffs. It's about authoring a new chapter where dominance masquerading as cooperation is rejected outright. The declaration is simple yet profound. We're not for sale. Reflecting on the whirlwind of shouts, threats, and ticking clocks, a deeper truth emerges. A prime minister held his ground against the superpower's tantrum, teaching the world that true strength lies not in the volume of negotiations but in the principles one refuses to abandon. While Washington gauged success through ultimatums, Ottawa rewrote its destiny, converting pressure into policy and solitude into solidarity. Carney didn't just proclaim that no deal surpasses a bad one. He demonstrated it by channeling adversity into opportunity. The risks are palpable. The Canadian Parliamentary Budget Office warns that a full-blown tariff war could obliterate over 180,000 jobs by early 2026. South of the border, the fallout is equally grim, with U.S. households potentially losing an average of $2,700 annually to inflation spurred by these measures. If this is the essence of America First, one wonders why it leaves everyone else advancing. Yet this saga transcends arithmetic. It's an examination of identity. Does one barter silence for market entry? Does one kneel to preserve billions? Carney opted for an alternative etched not in ledgers but an enduring fabric of steel rails, burgeoning ports, and a nation's steadfast resolve to depart when necessary. The pivotal query now isn't about the deal's details but the value of dignity, and whether we're prepared to invest in it. As this unfolds, the invitation extends to all. Should Canada retaliate with full force or maintain composure while constructing anew? If the U.S. pushes too far, do we yield or resist? The discourse